discussed only one part, and we have several topics to talk about. And another important thing before we are moving to the lecture tonight, in Sri Lanka today is the Poson Poy Day, right? So I think you may have know about that. Right, so where the Arahat Mahinda Thero introduced the Buddhism, this doctrine to the Sri Lankans on Poson Poy Day, right? So all the Buddhists in Sri Lanka are celebrating the Poson Poy today, and I think the Hachoji Temple also have organized some events on this Sunday, I guess, for the Poson Poy Day, right? It's just a quick reminder, right? So let's move into the lecture tonight, right? So we were discussing about the Makkaliputta Gosala, right? So I will go through the give me 1 minute. Right, so I will give you kind of a quick introduction to what we discussed so far, and I'm planning to finish this topic, the topic which is about the Makkaliputta Gosala tonight, right? So he was a contemporary teacher to there were 6 contemporary teachers during the time of Buddha, and Makkaliputta Gosala, one of the major contemporary leader within that specific time of Buddha, right? So we could get, when we talk about the Makkaliputta Gosala, even though the literature part of the Makkaliputta Gosala, actually Ajivaka's tradition, right? So the Makkaliputta Gosala was the teacher or the leader of the Ajivaka's tradition, right? So when we talk about the Ajivaka's, the literature part of the Ajivaka's tradition, even though it is included within the today's lecture note, we discussed in detail in last class, right? So don't worry, we will go through that again, right? So when we talk about the literature part, we learned that the primary, whenever we discuss about literature, we could go through primary sources as well as secondary sources, right? So when it comes to the Ajivaka's tradition, we could not actually find the primary sources. We could not find the primary sources. They may have existed, but we could not find the primary sources which are attributed to the Ajivaka's tradition, right? So due to that fact, from where we could learn more about the Ajivaka's tradition, right? So within the sources, within the literature sources of Buddhism, as well as the within Jain sources, we could learn more about the Ajivaka's tradition, as their primary sources are missing, right? So when it comes to the Buddhist literature, there is a specific sutta called Sammannapala Sutta, right? So we discussed this about this sutta, right? So Sammannapala Sutta of Digha Nikaya, Buddha, to whom Buddha preached. Can you give me a kind of introduction to the Sammannapala Sutta, which we discussed last week?
Samannapala Sutra was preached to the Ajatasattu.
Yes, King Ajatasattu. At that time, Buddha was in the Jivakam.
Ambavan.
Yeah. Jivakam, yes, very good. Jivakambavana, along with around 1,250 other bhikkhus, right? So at that time, King Ajatasattu visited Buddha, and he questioned about those 6 heretical teachers from from the Buddha, right? So as a result, as an answer for that specific question, which was asked by the King Ajatasattu, Buddha gave a very explained answer for King Ajatasattu, right? So within that specific sutta is identified as Samannapala Sutta, right? So within Samannapala Sutta, Buddha has explained about Purna Kassapa, Makkali Gosala, Ajita Kesa Kambali, Pakuda Kachayana, Sanjay Bellatiputta, and Nigantanataputto Mahavir. Right, so due to that fact, from Samannapala Sutta, we could learn more about the Makkaliputta Gosala as the primary sources of Ajivakas are not available currently, right? So when we talk about the Makkaliputta Gosala, he was the founder to the Ajivakas tradition, and we discussed about his early life as well during the last class, right? So then if you talk about the literature, I will go through the literature part again, right? So if we take the Ajivakas, it simply means the followers of the way of life. The Ajivakas, they entirely believed in the predeterminism, fate, or niyati, right? So fate or niyati, we will discuss about the philosophy of the Ajivikas tradition in detail after this topic, right? So as we discussed just now, the primary sources of the Ajivakas are not available, right? So it is believed that even though they are not available, it is believed that original Ajivakas text may have been written in the dialect called Eastern Prakrit, right? So it is a specific dialect in central or ancient India, right? So they believe that the specific dialect is similar to giant Prakrit called Ardha Magadhi, right? So and further they believe that the quotations and adaptations from the original text have been inserted to these Jain and Buddhist sources, right? So about the Ajivakas tradition, we could mainly learn more information from the Buddhist texts as well as Buddhist texts in the sense mainly from the Samannapala Sutta as well as from the Jain sources. When we talk about the Jain sources, there is a specific sutta called Bhagavati Sutta in Jain tradition. From that Bhagavati Sutta and from the Samannapala Sutta from Buddhist texts, we could learn more about the Ajivakas traditions, right? So if we talk about the secondary scriptures or secondary sources which include more about the Ajivakas tradition, Buddhist Digha Nikaya, within the Samannapala Sutta, and there is a specific Buddhist text called Manimekala. Within that text also, they have indicated about the Ajivakas tradition, and we further learned that from the Nilakeshi of the Giants or the Bhagavati Sutta, we could learn more about the Ajivakas tradition. And in some Tamil texts in India, they have written about the Ajivakas tradition. And also, there was a great commentator, Buddhaghosa. Within the Buddhaghosa's text also, he has talked more about the Ajivakas tradition, right? So that is about the literature sources, primary and secondary literature sources about the Ajivakas tradition, right? So due to the absence of the direct records from the Ajivakas tradition and Gosala, it is extremely difficult for us to take a complete and faithful account or the complete and faithful view of the Ajivakas tradition. Because we have to depend upon the upon these Buddhist texts and Jain texts, right? So we have to completely depend upon the Buddhist texts as well as the Jain texts, as we do not have, due to the absence of the direct records about the Ajivaka's tradition. Right, so that is the literature aspect. Right? You don't have to remember each and every word here, right? So if you could ask a question within exam, you may ask a question like briefly describe about the Makkali Putta Gosala or Ajivaka's tradition, right? So in that, if you were asked like that, then you could give at the very beginning, you could give a introduction to Makkali, who was the leader of the Ajivaka's tradition, Makkali Putta Gosala. Quickly you could give his introduction to his early life, and then you could, as you were asked about the Ajivaka's tradition, then you could give introduction to the literature. Right, so whenever you write about the literature, you don't have to remember each and every point here. Rather, simply you could try to remember the points what I'm teaching now, trying to grasp them at this moment. When we talk about the literature of the Ajivaka's tradition, in a literature, whenever I talk about any literature, we could find primary as well as secondary sources, right? So when it comes to the Ajivaka's tradition, we could not find the primary sources are not available, right? They may have existed, but to date we could not find enough sources that we could identify as the primary sources, right? So thereby we have to completely depend upon the secondary sources, right? So what are the secondary sources which gives more information about the Ajivaka's tradition, right? Buddhist text, Digha Nikaya Samannapala Sutta, and the Jain text, Bhagavati Sutta. There is another Buddhist text called Manimekala. There are some Tamil texts in India, in ancient India, and also Buddha Ghoshas. In some commentaries of the Buddha Ghoshas, he has explained about the Makkali Gosala's life, right? So that is all about the literature of the Ajivaka's tradition, right? So if we move into the philosophical part, right? So I have given you a very detailed very detailed introduction to the philosophy. You could go through the lecture note, but I will discuss the most important facts within the class, right? So whenever you are getting ready for the exams and whenever you face to the exam, you don't have to, actually it is impossible to remember or memorize everything which I have included here, right? So try to you could highlight, or you could do whatever, you could make short notes or whatever applicable for you. Try to write what are the most important points, right? Only the most important points. Here I have given many details, but within the class also I'm planning to discuss you could go through the lecture note whenever you have free time. Within the class we will discuss more specific information and important information to the philosophy, right? So whenever it is very easy, right? So we have very few important points here to learn about the philosophy. We have already learned about the philosophy, the main facts about the philosophy in the Ajivaka's tradition, right? So when we talk about, if we take just the meaning of the Ajivakas, the followers of the way of life, they are the followers of the way of life, and Ajivaka's tradition could be identified as one of the heterodox schools of Indian philosophy, right? It could be identified as one of the heterodox schools of Indian philosophy. And also, when we talk about the Ajivaka's tradition, it was a organized group. Ajivakas, this was a group, organized group with renunciators, organized renunciates who form a discrete community. This was a very separate community, right? Organized by renunciates, right? They gave up everything. Hope you can remember when we talk about it actually came from the Vedic civilization and all, right? So within the Vedic civilization, hope you can remember we discussed about Aranyakas. When it comes to the Aranyakas phase, almost all the groups were renunciates. They gave up their luxuries, they gave up their family lives and everything, and they wanted to abandon themselves. They wanted to abandon themselves, right? So Ajivakas was such a group. They were a specific group, discrete community organized with renunciates, right? Right. So and if we take the the focus of the focal point of the specific philosophy, niyati, right? Niyati, they believed in niyati or fate. They believed in niyati or fate. They believed in absolute fatalism and predeterminism. They believed in absolute fatalism and predeterminism. They believed that nothing could change the life, right? So everything has been predetermined. Everything has been predetermined. Nobody, whatever we do, we could not change the fate. We could not change the fate, right? So predeterminism and fatalism, right? So there is no, according to them, there is no free will. Everything has happened. Everything is happening now. Everything will happen in the future. They all are preordained. They all are predetermined, right? So everything was happened. Everything is happening now. Everything will happen within the future. They all are preordained. They all are happening as a predeterminism, right? Right. So due to this predeterminism nature, they believed that the living beings never could achieve the liberation due to, as everything is predetermined, everything is happening due to the fate. They believed that no living being could not achieve the liberation or moksha from the cycle of birth, right? So they did nothing, right? So they just live their lives as it is, because they believe that everything is happening as their fate, right? So they just exerted their lives, and they just lived without achieving anything, right? So likewise, they believe that due to the predeterminist nature, they could not achieve anything within the life so as the liberation or moksha from the cycle of the birth, right? So when it comes to the karma and karma doctrine, when according to the Ajivaka's tradition, they denied that. They did not believe in karma doctrine, right? So they believed that they considered the karma doctrine as a fallacy. They did not believe in the karma doctrine. They did not believe in the karma doctrine, right? So, and also when it comes to the Ajivaka's tradition, there is a when we talk about the metaphysics of the Ajivaka's tradition, there is a specific theory called theory of atoms, right? So they believed that every living being or every non-living being, anything is composed of atoms. All the living beings are is a combination or aggregation of atoms. All the living beings are made up with composing or aggregation of the atoms, right? So but the nature of the aggregations, and further they believe that nature of the aggregations were predetermined, right? So this is very interesting, right? So they always whatever they believed, the main point was predeterminism, right? So there is when we talk about the metaphysics of the Ajivaka's tradition, they believed that all living beings were made up with atoms. made up with atoms. And interesting part here is the nature of aggregations, how they were aggregated, how those atoms were aggregated were predetermined by the cosmic laws and forces. The way in which those atoms were aggregated are also predetermined, right? It also predetermined, right? Right. So those are the important parts here. When we talk about the mainly you have to remember when it comes to the philosophy of the Ajivaka's tradition, they believed in fatalism, predeterminism, fatalism, niyati, or predeterminism, right? So the living beings could not achieve anything within the life due to the preordained nature, right? So when we talk about the metaphysics of the Ajivaka's tradition within this doctrine, they believe that all the living beings are made up with atoms, and those by aggregating the atoms and the way of so if you take living beings, they are different from one another, right? So the how they being different, because all the even though all the human beings are made up with atoms, the aggregation, the how it was aggregated are also predetermined. The way of aggregation was also predetermined by the cosmic laws and principles, right? So within the giants, we learned that there was a within the giants traditions, there is a specific sutta which talks more about the Ajivaka's tradition, which is the Bhagavati Sutta, right? So within the Bhagavati Sutta, it provides more details about the Gosala, right? So when we talk about the Gosala, we learned that he was a contemporary to the Mahavira as well as the Gautama Buddha. And within according to the Bhagavati Sutta of the giant sources, we could learn that the Makkali Gosala, he lived with Niganthanatha Putta or the Mahavira around 6 years, right? So they lived together around 6 years. And within the giant sources, they have of the Bhagavati Sutta, it has mentioned a specific interesting experiment which was done by the Makkaliputta Gosala together with the Mahavira, right? So we are not going to talk about the experiment in detail, right? So you could go through the lecture note whenever you have a free time, right? So the Makkaliputta Gosala conducted a specific experiment along with the Mahavira by using a sesame plant, right? So but through that specific experiment, Makkaliputta Gosala concluded that all the living beings were subject to reanimation, and not death and destruction, right? So through that specific experiment, which was conducted by Makkaliputta Gosala together with the Mahavira, he concluded that all the beings within the world were subject to reanimation, right? So through this experiment, he added several points to his doctrine. Through this sesame plant experiment, along with the Mahavira, he added some information to his doctrine, right? So he further mentioned that all the beings are subject to fixed and unchangeable series throughout their lifetime, and those fixed and unchangeable series, whatever the beings are facing throughout their lifetime, are unalterable, could not change by anyone, right? Through that sesame plant, he came into several conclusions, right? And he added those whatever the points he concluded through the experiment, he added those points to his doctrine. right? So, and also according to the Samannapala Sutta, according to the Buddhist Samannapala Sutta, it has included that souls or all the beings are without force, power, and energy. If we take any being or living being within the world, they are without power, source, energy, anything, right? So they get specific powers, energy, and all by according to their fate, right? So that is how. So if we take living beings within the world, they appear differently. They have different forces. They have different energy levels, right? So according to the Ajivaka's tradition, we could gain more information from the Samannapala Sutta, right? So within the Samannapala Sutta, it mentioned that all the souls, all the living beings are without force, power, and energy of their own, but they transformed they get those energy and power based on their fate. They receive the power, energy, and force based on their fate and individual nature, based on their fate due to the necessary required conditions and individual nature, right? So those are the main points about the philosophy. And we are going to talk about the finally we are going to talk about the important characteristics that we could find within the Ajivaka's tradition, right? So as we learned earlier, Makkaliputta Gosala and the Ajivaka's tradition, they denied the karma doctrine. They did not believe. They believed that they considered the karma doctrine as fallacy, which means they did not believe in the karma doctrine. They denied the karma doctrine, right? So, and they upheld the Makkaliputta Gosala. He upheld fatalism and niyati. Fatalism, niyati, and predeterminism, right? So, whenever you ask to describe about the Ajivaka's tradition, under the philosophy part, under the doctrinal philosophy part, what you have to mention is the the doctrine is basically depend upon the fate, niyati, predeterminism. That is the main doctrinal parts that we could learn within the Ajivaka's tradition, right? So when we talk about the Ajivaka's tradition, there are two kind of persons. We could find two kinds of person. The first group of person is Sambodhaka, right? So Sambodhaka is where always remains in the highest stage of life, always remains in the highest stage of life. And the other group of people was the Mandala. Mandala is where they believe that this group of people come down to the earth to impart, to teach the sacred knowledge to the world. They come to the world to teach, to impart the sacred, whatever their sacred doctrine to the world or their lay devotees, right? So whenever within the Ajivaka's tradition, they believed that they have two kind of rural persons, Sambodhaka and Mandala. Sambodhaka is where Sambodhaka was the highest group, right? So always remain as the highest stage of life. And the second group is the Mandala. This group is where they are the group of people or group of persons who come to world to teach the doctrine to others, or to impart the doctrinal facts or the information to others, Sambodhaka and Mandala, right? So and also it is believed that whenever we learn about the Ajivaka's tradition, they adhere to the followers of the Ajivaka's tradition. They adhere to severe ascetic practices. They adhered to, they followed severe ascetic practices. They followed severe ascetic practices, right? So you could mention these points whenever you get a question about the Ajivaka's tradition, right? So they adhered, all the followers of the Ajivaka's tradition, the ascetics, they adhered, they followed severe ascetic practices, right? So within the Jataka stories also, within the Jataka stories, we could learn more about the Ajivaka's tradition. We could learn more about their living styles, their dress patterns, right, etc. We could learn more about the Ajivaka's tradition, right? So how if we talk about the characteristics of the followers of the Ajivaka's tradition, right? So it's interesting, right? So they remained nude or naked, right? So we learned that they were a group of naked ascetics which were prevailed within the India at that time, right? So they remained nude or naked, pulled out their hair, and even though uh, they were naked and they believed in fatalism, predeterminism, and all, they had a strong followers, strong group of followers. At that time, they had a strong and large group of followers or lay devotees, right? So likewise in Buddhism and all the other Shramanic traditions, Ajivakas could be identified, the specific tradition could be identified as one of the earliest started Shramanic tradition within India, right? So they had a strong base of followers. They had a strong base of followers at that time. They had lay devotees who were following the tradition, right? So, and it is said that those disciples or those lay devotees abide to strict moral observances, right? So they abide to strict moral observances, and they had severe form of asceticism, right? So the followers of the Ajivaka's tradition, they were abide to strict moral observances, and also they adhere to severe ascetic practices, right? So as we discussed earlier at the very beginning, they were a group of specific group of ascetics who remained nude or naked. And at the beginning, initially, it is said that mainly they were identified as a nude or naked group of ascetics, but later on in some sources, they have included that the specific group, the Ajivaka's group, they have wore mud clothing to cover their bodies. They have used clothes which were made up with mud, But basically, if we take the basic picture of the Ajivaka's tradition, they are identified as naked group of ascetics. But throughout the time later on, in some sources, it has included that they have used mud cloths to cover their bodies. They have used mud clothings to cover their bodies, right? So, and there was a tree called Asoka tree. Ajivakas worshipped that Asoka tree, right? So they worship that Asoka tree. As we talked earlier, they practiced followed severe ascetic practices, and they were nude, they were naked, and also they tried to keep their body dirty, right? They were not clean group of ascetics, right? So rather they tried to keep their bodies dirty. They tried to keep their bodies dirty, right? So as we learned that they were a group of the renunciated group of people, they gave up their luxury life and everything, right? So one of another characteristic that we could identify within the Ajivaka's tradition is they gave up their household life, right? So that is why we identify them as renunciates, right? So they gave up their family life, they gave up their luxuries, and they wanted to abandon themselves. and they abandoned themselves, and they made themselves naked, they made themselves dirty, and they lived such a life by renunciating themselves, right? So initially naked, but in some cases we could learn that they covered their body by using the mud clothing, right? So another specific fact that we could learn about with the Ajivaka's followers or devotees, they within their hands they carried a bunch of peacock feathers. Within their hand they carried a bunch of peacock feathers. Within their hands they carried a bunch of peacock feathers, right? So those are main characteristics that we could learn about the Ajivaka's tradition. And also according to the Bhagavati Sutta, within the Jain tradition, it has mentioned that they restricted themselves from eating 5 kinds of fruits, right? So 5 kinds of fruits. They restricted themselves by eating some foods, right? So and within the suttas and within these literature sources, we could learn more about the austere practices, ascetic practices, which were conducted by the Ajivakas. They conducted several. Actually, they adhered to severe ascetic practices, right? So another one of the most important point that we could why the Ajivaka's tradition was more popular within the India at that time, right? So that is one of the major point that we could talk about, right? So even though they believed in fatalism, they did nothing, right? So they just exerted themselves to achieve to face whatever happening to the life. Even though they had a Ajivaka's tradition, they had a strong base of followers at that time, right? So because it was the one reason we could say that it was the among the Shramanic tradition, it was the earliest established tradition within the India, right? So it is one reason, but upon that, another reason why they had a strong base of followers, because it accepted people from all the castes. It accepted people from all the castes, right? So at that time, after the Vedic period, right? So we discussed this fact again and again. The society of the India, it was layered into several hierarchies, right? Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, right? So only the people who were there within the upper layer, they had the chance to follow a religion, adhere to several religious practices and all, right? So only the upper layered people had the chance to embrace a doctrine, to learn more about doctrines and all. But the lower layer people, especially when it comes to the Shudras, right? So they did not had that chance. They did not had the chance even to listen to a prayer, right? We talk this matter again and again, right? So in such a situation, the Ajivaka's tradition was introduced, right? So, and the reason why it gained more popularity, because it gave the chance to all the people who were there within all the classes to come to this specific tradition, right? So they accepted all the classes, right? So, and not only all the classes, but also to the women, right? So within the Vedic period, we learned that women were not only the lower class people who Shudras, but also women. They were really ill-treated. They did not have a chance to even to come up with their own ideas, right? And etc. They had nothing, right? So women were really ill-treated more than the Shudras, more than the class of Shudras, right? So they had no rights within the society, right? So another reason this religion was more became more prominent at that era, because it accepted all the people from all the classes, and also mainly they accepted women to the religion. It accepted women to the religion, right? So to the Ajivaka order, right? So it is one of the major point, even though they do not impart a valuable doctrinal facts to the people, but they provided the chance, they provided the equality. They provided the equality to the society, right? So due to that fact, this religion became more powerful. Due to that fact, the Makkaliputta Gosala, he could gain more followers. He could make strong followers base to the religion, right? So whenever you were asked to discuss about this religion, you could write, you should indicate this point. You should indicate this point, because that is why it became, even though actually within India, the Ajivakas tradition is identified as heterodox religion, right? Heterodox religion, even though this religion had a great followers base, great number of lay devotees, right? So why was that? Because it accepted people from all the classes, all the castes, as well as the women to the religion, right? Right. So that is all about the characteristics and important points of the Ajivakas tradition. And the another point that you have to remember is Makkaliputta Gosala. According to the Bhagavati Sutta, within the Jain tradition, it has indicated that we actually discussed about this part, right? So it has indicated that Makkaliputta Gosala had a close connection with the Mahavira or Nigantanatha Buddha, right? So Makkaliputta Gosala became Mahavira's disciple at the very beginning. Makkaliputta Gosala became Mahavira's disciple at the very beginning, and he started to follow him, but later on they were separated, and they went with their own individual religions, right? So they were, just remember, you have to remember the Makkaliputta Gosala and Mahavira, they lived together. We hope you can remember, we talked about a sesame plant experiment, right? So they were together, right? So, but around 6 years, but later on they were separated. And they followed their own paths, right? So just remember, the Makkaliputta Gosala lived, he was together with the Mahavira for several years, right? So those are the basic points about to the Ajivakas tradition, right? So whenever you ask to discuss about the Ajivakas tradition, or whenever you ask to talk about the Ajivakas tradition, right? So you could talk about the teacher at the first, right? So Makkaliputta Gosala, and you could give a very brief introduction to his early life, right? So he was born into slavery according to the Buddha Ghosha's commentaries, right? So and his early life is not a part which matters, right? So you don't have to talk about the early life in detail. Rather, you could talk about more about the literature and the philosophy, and the main characteristics which are attributed to the Ajivakas tradition, right? So when we talk about the literature, primary sources and the secondary sources, right? So primary sources are not available. They may have existed, but now they are not available. Due to that fact, we have, in order to learn more about the Ajivakas tradition, we have to depend upon the secondary sources, right? So when it comes to the secondary scriptures, to the Ajivaka's tradition, Buddhism, Digha Nikaya Samannapala Sutta, Jainism, Bhagavati Sutta, and there was another Buddhist text called Manimekala. Through that Buddhist text also we could learn more about the Ajivaka's tradition, and there are some Tamil scriptures in ancient India which talks about the Ajivaka's tradition, and also within the Buddha Ghosha's commentaries, we could learn more about the Ajivaka's tradition, right? So that is about the literature. Then philosophy, when it comes to the philosophy, if we take the meaning of the word, followers of the way of life, right? Followers of the way of life, Ajivakas, they extremely believed in fatalism, predeterminism, and fate. Fate and predeterminism, or else you could say on niyati, niyati or fate. What happened, what is happening, what will happen, they all are preordained. They all are preordained, right? So due to the predetermined nature, no living being could achieve the liberation or moksha. That is how they believed, right? So they did not believe in karma doctrine. They believed the karma as fallacy, right? So and when we talk about the metaphysics of the Ajivaka's tradition, they have mentioned that all the living beings are made up by aggregating the atoms, by atoms, made up with atoms, and the how they differ from one another. The nature of the aggregation of the atoms are predetermined, right? So they attach the predeterminism here also within the metaphysics, to the metaphysics as well. The nature of the aggregations are predetermined, right? And according within the Jains or the Jain tradition, within the Bhagavati Sutta, we learned that along with the Mahavira, Makaliputta Gosal, he has done a specific conducted experiment using sesame plant, right? So through that sesame plant experiment, he concluded that all the living beings are subject to reanimation. Through that fact, which was found through that experiment, he added to his doctrine that all the beings are subject to fixed and unchangeable series throughout their life, right? So they are unalterable. They could not change, right? So within the Samannapala Sutta, it has mentioned that according to the Ajivakas, according to the Makaliputta Gosala, all at the very beginning, at the very first, all the souls are without force, without power, or without energy. But how they transform, how they become, how they achieve different energy levels, right? So the way in which they achieve different energy levels, force levels, by through their fate, basically through their fate, and required other necessary conditions, and due to their individual nature, they gain they could transform their energy and power levels, right? So we learn, and again they did not believe in the karma doctrine, right? So Kaliputta Gosala and Ajivaka's tradition, they did not believe in the karma doctrine, right? So according to the Ajivaka's tradition, we could find two types of persons, Sambodhaka and Mandala, right? So Sambodhaka was the highest stage, the group of people who remained within the highest stage of life, and Mandala was the second group of people. They believe that those are the people who come to the world, to come to the earth, to impart their doctrinal facts to the lay devotees or to their followers, right? So, and the specific tradition, the Ajivaka's tradition, they adhered their lay devotees. They had a very strong base of lay devotees, very large population of lay devotees, and they adhered to severe form of ascetic practices. They adhered severe ascetic practices. If we learn about the main characteristics that we could find within to this attributed to this specific tradition. They were naked, a group of naked people, but in some sources they have included that by throughout the time later on they used the mud cloths to cover their bodies, and also they worshipped a specific tree called Ashoka tree. They adhered to the severe ascetic practices, and they kept their bodies dirty. And also they were renunciates, the group of people who gave up everything. Right, gave up everything. They gave up household life. They gave up household life. And also the one point that we could identify easily, the people who were within this group, the Ajivakas traditional people, the way in which that we could identify the Ajivaka followers easily was they kept a bunch of peacock feathers in their hands. They kept a bunch of peacock feathers in their hands, right? So, and also they abstained, they restricted themselves from eating different types of foods, right? So main point, how they gained the Ajivakas tradition or Makaliputta Gosala, how they gained more popularity because they accepted all the people who were belong to all the classes, right? Who were belong to the like just like Buddhism, right? So it was open to all the people, right? So no restrictions were there. The religion was open for all the people, right? So it is one of the major point, one of the good point that we could identify within the Ajivakas tradition. Actually, the philosophy or doctrinal facts we could not actually. It was a heterodox religion according to the ancient Indian religions, but it accepted no restrictions to the people within the religion, right? So it is a good point that we could talk about, that we could find within the Ajivakas tradition. And also Makaliputta Gosala, he had a close connection with Mahavira. They both lived together around 6 years, and due to several misunderstandings, or their several, they both believed in two separate religions. Due to that fact, but they were separated and walked on their own paths, right? So that is all about the Makaliputta Gosal, right? So next class I will be taking hopefully the Ajita Kambali. Not yet sure, I have not yet done the lecture note, right? So take down a question for homework. Try give a detailed explanation to the Ajivakas tradition. Give a detailed explanation to the Ajivakas tradition. Right, so this is a very wide question, right? So what I want to do is actually you to go through all the topics we discussed here, right? So don't depend upon the lecture note which I have given you, right? So try to concentrate on the points which were discussed within the class, right? So try to focus on the points which are very important, right? So don't focus on the lecture note, right? So try to point out only the major or important points here, right? So, and whenever you are getting ready to the exam, then you don't have to go through the lecture notes. It's time consuming and you don't feel like doing that, right? So you could go through the question, you could go through the answer which you write then, right? So it is easy, it is actually easy for you to grasp, it is easy for you to memorize. That is an easy way to get ready for your exam, right? So that is all for today. Right, so then thank you very much for joining with me. Study well, go through your lecture notes. If you have any questions, then email me. I will be there 24 anytime. I will reply you. If I get as soon as I get a free time, I will reply you if you have any question, right? So go through your lecture note. Thank you very much for joining with me. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Good
Very
night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good night.
night.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.